Lesson 40 Devadatta, the reversed reflection of the Buddha, the anti-hero and anti-muse of the Lotus Sutra. If we know Devadatta, Daibadatta, in Japanese, Bayofouê, we will better understand why the announcement of his attainment of Buddhahood in the future is a Lotusic revolution. Who is Devadatta, Bayofouê, in Bai? Devadatta, through his family ties with the Thus Come One Shakyamuni, through his monastic journey and through his acts of opposition to Buddhist law which will earn him the great avichi hell, has maintained close relations with the Buddha over the course of many lives. His family ties with the Buddha, eldest son of King Devadatta, younger brother of Devadatta, father of the Buddha, Devadatta Bayofouê, in Bai, an Ivorian language, was, so to speak, the first cousin of the Thus Come One. Daibadatta was also the elder brother of Ananda, secretary of the Buddha, called the one who heard the most teachings of the Buddha. His monastic journey Bayofouê entered the religious Sangha shortly after the awakening of Gautama, at the initiative of his brothers, to exclude him from the royal succession. Having discovered this plot later, he became very bitter and even paranoid. The awakened one and Moggallana having opposed a categorical refusal to his request tending to acquire mystical powers, he turned to a Brahmin, Sudanna, who taught him how to acquire these said powers. His acts of opposition to Buddhist law, the three major transgressions. Among all the acts of opposition to the law, hobo, in Japanese, perpetrated by Devadatta, three are major transgressions or cardinal faults: initiation of a dissension among believers, injury inflicted on the Buddha, assassination of an erhate, Utparlavana. Dissension among believers, the first Buddhist schism. Now endowed with mystical powers, Devadatta, whose ego grew rapidly, decided to replace the Buddha, the one he had already envied in their childhood, at the head of the Sangha. He publicly asked the Thus Come One to give him his professorship. The Buddha, of course, categorically refused. Finally, he managed to divert a certain number of monks to his account, thus creating the first Buddhist schism. The injury inflicted on the Buddha, Bayofouê decided to kill the Buddha. So he threw a rock from the top of the Vulture Peak onto the Thus Come One. The rock injured the Buddha, whose blood spurted out at the foot. The murder of the nun Utparlavana. Obviously, faced with her hobos, acts of opposition to Buddhist law, the disciples of the Buddha could not remain without reaction. The sutras tell us that one of them, Utparlavana, who had reached the stage of arhat, that is to say the stage of non-regression, reproaching him for his anti-Buddhist acts, sharply admonished him. Devadatta, furious at what he considered to be a bravado, beat her until she died. Sacrilege, once again. Devadatta had just taken the life of an erhate. Retributions endured by him, the great avichi hell. Thus, out of the five cardinal faults identified by the sutras, Bayofouê, the reverse reflection or antithesis or inverse synonymy of the Buddha, committed 3, or 60% of the 5 main transgressions. Now, committing one of the 5 capital transgressions stated by the sutras, committing parricide, committing matricide, injuring a Buddha, killing an arhat, creating dissension among practitioners, leads straight to hell. So Devadatta, the self-proclaimed sworn enemy of the Buddha, will go straight to hell, to the great avichi hell. However, in chapter 12, which originally bears his name alone, of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha whom he had martyred declared that Devadatta would attain Buddhahood in the future. His statement, in the Great Assembly, appeared as revolutionary. The Lotus Revolution wrought the opening of Buddhahood to all the worst beings of Jambudvipa. Chapter 12 of the Lotus Sutra teaches us that the link between the Thus Come One and Devadatta does not date from the Shoho era. In the past, Daibadatta was the master of Shakyamuni. It should be noted that the scope of Devadatta's enlightenment is based on the relationship of the inverted drum. Bayofouê, in many previous lives, master of the Buddha, ascends Shishiki. The aforementioned chapter 12 is the occasion for the Buddha to reveal to the Great Assembly that in the past, the sovereign Suzudin or Massa, chief or king, in Malinke, a language of Côte d'Ivoire, in search of the Lotus Sutra that he had abandoned his throne to put himself at the service of a wise man, Ajita, also called Chekaroba, old wise man, in Malinke, a national Ivorian language, taught in the Lotus Sutra during countless existences. This wise man was Devadatta. Let us listen to the Buddha on this subject. At that time, the Buddha addressed the bodhisattvas, celestial and human beings, and the four kinds of believers in these terms. In the past, during countless lives, I have sought the Lotus Sutra without ever giving up. Over countless kalpas, I have constantly appeared as the ruler of a kingdom who vows to seek unparalleled enlightenment. But for the sake of the law, this king gave up his kingdom and throne for his son. A sage came to the king and said, "I have the great text of the vehicle called the Lotus Sutra of the mystic law. If you never disobey me, I will teach it to you." When the king heard these words of the sage, he danced for joy. Immediately, he accompanied the sage, providing him with what he needed, picking fruits, drawing water, gathering firewood, preparing meals, even offering his own body as a couch and seat without ever caring for his body or mind. He served the sage in this way for 1,000 years, all for the sake of the law, working diligently, acting as a provider of livelihood, and ensuring that the seer lacked nothing. The Buddha said to the monks, "That king at that time was myself and the sage was Devadatta. Because Devadatta was a good friend to me, I was able to fully develop the 6 paramitas. Because Devadatta was a good friend to me, I was able to attain impartial and correct enlightenment so that I could save sentient beings on a large scale. He will attain Buddhahood. He will be called the Thus Come One Heavenly King." Devadatta's future enlightenment, the inverted drum relationship or inverted binding or Sandrafia relationship. This is a connection formed with the Lotus Sutra by opposing or slandering it. The expression poison drum comes from the Nirvana Sutra and refers to a drum smeared with poison. When someone plays this poison drum, all those who hear it, even inadvertently, die. Similarly, when the Lotus Sutra is taught, those who embrace it and those who oppose it alike receive the seeds of Buddhahood. It is said that even if a person were to fall into hell for slandering the Lotus Sutra, the bond created with the said sutra will still allow him to attain Buddhahood. This type of relationship can also be called a relationship with Sandrafia. Sandrafia is a mythical bird of the Akan cosmogony, an ethnic community in the center, eastern coast of Côte d'Ivoire. When, in the bush, you see it alive, you die. When you see it dead, you die too. Speaking of the attainment of Buddhahood and the future of the doubly patricide and regicide sovereign, Ajatashatru, Kpasagnan, in Bede, the Daishonin insists on the relationship of the inverted drum. Ajatashatru was a cruel king who killed his own father, but he was among those present at the time when the Lotus Sutra was taught, and, after hearing a single sentence of it, he formed a link with the sutra, which allowed him to subsequently attain enlightenment. The scope of Devadatta's future enlightenment, the consolidation of the inclusive character of the attainment of Buddhahood. Bayofouê may be the worst man in all of Jambudvipa. The prospect of the enlightenment of other people less bad than Devadatta strengthens the universal character of the attainment of Buddhahood. Back to the attainment of future enlightenment of Devadatta. The prospect of the attainment of Buddhahood by Devadatta, whose story I have just told, the worst being in all of Jambudvipa, the southern continent, planet Earth, perhaps in the entire system of major worlds, in the future after the attainment of the enlightenment of Princess Ozawa, reinforces the inclusive character of the attainment of Buddhahood. The Daishonin, in the supremacy of the law Otogoze Gosho Saku, Gosho number 70, says nothing else. Devadatta is the worst man there is in all of Jambudvipa, but it is predicted in the Lotus Sutra that he will become the Thus Come Heavenly Sovereign. If Princess Ozawa can be considered as a Lotusic heroine, the muse of the Lotus Sutra, Devadatta, must be considered as the Lotusic anti-hero, the anti-muse of the Lotus Sutra. However, it remains that both Princess Ozawa and Devadatta are eligible for Buddhahood.